Thank you so much. It's lovely to hear all the chatter. So in order to honour David's life, we also have to acknowledge his death. As many of you know, he has been living at Kew Gardens Residential Aged Care for the last few years. And throughout that time, and despite his age, he enjoyed relatively good health. And that's why it may seem a little surreal to be here today. However, in recent weeks, his body began to slow down and he passed away peacefully on Sunday, the 8th of December, 2024. So now I'd like to invite you to join with me in singing Dear Lord and Father of Mankind. Thank you, Catherine. So the 24th of November 1926 to the 8th of December 2024. In between David's birth and death was his incredible life. And this morning we will be hearing about the years between those dates. We will hear about the things that kept him busy, the funny stories and moments gathered along the way from his 98 laps around the sun. And it would be impossible for us to capture a whole lifetime this morning or have enough time for you to say thank you for all that he did and the love that he showered upon you. But humbly, we will do our best. And now I'd like to invite Mark to take some time to reflect on David's life.
Hello, everyone. 4 years ago, I sat down with my father so that he could tell me his life history. At the end of the interview, if we can call it that, he said, "What about a title?" I asked him what he had in mind. He said, "How about 94 years of bullshit?" So today, 4 years later, I'm going with my title, 98 years of bullshit. My father was born in 1926 at the family home in Wellesley Road, Hawthorn, which is just around the corner from Scotch College. He was the second-born twin of his sister Doff, who's here with us today, and the fifth and final child of John and Ella, who, as it happens, were strict Methodist teetotalers. He had three other siblings, Frida, Ian and Brenda. Now only Doffy is left. My father lived to a remarkable age, particularly given that he was born prematurely, at home, no hospital, no humidity crib or anything like that, but he survived to live to 98. He lived through the Great Depression and World War II. He saw Bradman bat and attended the 1956 Olympic Games at the MCG. During his lifetime, Melbourne Football Club won 11 of its 13 premierships, of which I am eternally jealous. His birth year is shared, of 1926, is shared with some other reasonably well-known people. Queen Elizabeth II, Marilyn Monroe and Jerry Lewis, Hugh Hefner, Sir David Attenborough, Chuck Berry and Dame Joan Sutherland, and Sir Jack Brabham. Of this group, only the other David remains. Although Dad was not a celebrity or superstar like the above, he was greatly loved by his family and friends. He lived life to the full and spread good humour and cheer to us all. We all left with wonderful memories of the man. I would like to take a walk with you through my father's life and hope you will bear with me if I exceed my allotted time limit. Dad entered the Scotch Junior School, aged 4.5. In 1932, the Great Depression forced the family to rent out the family home in Wellesley Road and move around the corner into a 2-bedroom flat in Calantina Road. So that's 2 bedrooms for parents and 5 kids, and 2 parents in a 2-bedroom flat. The rent for the flat was 30 shillings or $3 a week in today's money. It's interesting, when I was speaking to Dad, he had a very good memory of what things cost. The move was important, however, in the context of Dad's later lifelong friendships with members of what became known as the Calantina Road mob, which included Bob Arnold, John Ulrich and Peter Sizer. In the following years until World War II, Dad remembers racing billy carts down Calantina Road, which may have contributed to his later tendency to drive too fast. Did I mention Sir Jack Brabham? He was also rescued from drowning in the Yarra in Hawthorn and lived through the polio epidemic of 1937 when schools were closed for a month. During the war years, Dad keenly followed the exploits of his older brother Ian, whom he idolised, and Ian was a naval commander in the war-torn Mediterranean. It was a time of rationing, of tea, butter, meat and clothing. The Wesley College boys arrived to share Scotch's classrooms and grounds for 2 years, with one school doing classes from 7 a.m. to lunchtime, and then the other school from lunch till 5 p.m. During this time, Dad was hit by a car as he stepped off a tram. His major injury was the loss of a contraband tin of cigarettes. He achieved the rank of lieutenant in the Scotch Cadets, which led to later events in his life, and he took science subjects because he was intending to pursue a career as an industrial chemist. In 1944, my father was called up for military service, for which he was more than willing. He opted for the Navy, but was rejected because of his poor eyesight. The Army accepted him, but by the time it came to enlist in 1945, he was told that the war was nearly over and that he was no longer required. In 1945, he went to university. The intention was to study science, to become an industrial chemist. He did it part-time because he was working to earn some money at the Pizzy Tannery in Richmond. Ella's maiden name was Pizzy, and the Pizzy family owned and ran a very successful tannery in Richmond, which discharged all its waste products into the Yarra, but that's another matter. With regard to university, he was there with Bob Arnold, and together they emerged from first year with honours in billiards. But little else to show. He didn't like the job at the tannery because it was a dirty, smelly job testing tanning liquids, lime pits, and his diabetic Uncle Tom's urine. So not surprisingly, the writing was on the wall, and the following year his father John offered him employment in his real estate agency, which he established in 1924 and had conducted successfully even through the Great Depression. The real estate agency was on the corner of Riversdale and Glenferrie Roads in Hawthorn, where it remained for more than 60 years. My father had a well-known love of cars, but this was preceded by a penchant for motorcycles. First an Eagle and then a Matchless. In 1949, together with a £300 inheritance, he sold the Matchless to finance a trip to England, taking a year's leave from the real estate agency with John's permission. He sailed on a ship called the Orion with Doff, and they endured a 5-week voyage where they slept in bunk beds below deck with no wash basins or cupboards. They queued for saltwater baths and terrible English food. The passage cost them £72, or around $144. In England, Dad and Doff enjoyed touring the country in a hire car until Dad got a job in Australia House's immigration branch, where, among other things, he visited industrial cities in England to recruit tradesmen for passage to Australia as £10 poms. Upon his return to Australia in 1950, he was met at Station Pier by his parents and his cousin Joan, whom he'd never met. Joan had come down from Goulburn to stay with John and Ella, who were now back at Wellesley Road. Love blossomed but was put on hold when Mum went to Sydney to study nursing. Dad took several trips to Sydney to visit her, including one where he hitched a lift on the HMAS Hawkesbury, a frigate commanded by his brother Ian. But a better story is when he bought a Renault in Sydney to drive home. It caught fire en route. And this was the first in a line of motoring mishaps for my father. Dad proposed to Mum in 1955, and they were married in the Scotch Chapel in 1956. My mother's father, George Mescal, managed to outrage Ella by organising a 9-gallon keg of beer for the reception at the Butley Wootton Mansion, which is not far from here in Kew. In 1957, Dad joined the Citizens Military Forces, now the Army Reserve. He served for 14 years, rising to the rank of captain. Service involved regular army nights each week, which seemed to me to involve a lot of beer, training camps at Puckapunyal, and bivouacs in the Victorian bush, which I think featured even more beer. The family moved from Hawthorn homes in Glen Street to Selwood Street and finally to 64 Lura Grove, a 5-bedroom house near the top of the Lura Grove Hill. It was purchased in 1965 for the princely sum of £9,750, or a bit under $20,000. I suspect the property is probably worth about $5 million now. This was where the family would grow and flourish, and was the place of many legendary parties thrown by an always genial and welcoming host. but not in a dressing gown like Hugh. There was often music, including singing around the family pianola. Dad had a large collection of 78 RPM records, but I don't think he collected Chuck Berry. He may have collected Dame Joan Sutherland, I'm not sure. 3 years later, Dad accepted a posting to Vietnam during the war. He was there as an observer on behalf of his CMF regiment, which was the 4th 19th Light Horse Regiment. He was only there a few weeks, but as you can imagine, our mother was not entirely thrilled by that particular undertaking. This army service had an unexpected consequence when one of his comrades, John Dixon, was appointed event controller for the inaugural Sunbury Pop Festival in 1972. Dad was recruited to man the radio caravan, the communication hub for all the festival's operations. He filled this role for 3 years, which had the side benefit of granting one of his sons free access to the many delights of the festival. I'm sure that my siblings will cover the fun of the 1970s and 1980s, so I'll jump forward to 1986 when Dad sold the John Purvis and Son business. The agency had operated for 62 years and Dad had worked there for 40 of those, the last 14 as managing director as John stepped away from the business. He then took up a post at the Real Estate Institute of Victoria dealing with inquiries, complaints and disputes for the next 10 years. During the 1990s, he lectured in real estate studies at TAFE. In retirement, Dad was an active volunteer, giving hours of his time to the Scotch Film Society, selecting films to show, writing reviews and sending newsletters to members. He became quite the film buff, appropriate for someone born in the same year as Marilyn Monroe. One weekend after his retirement, I thought that he seemed a little bored. I suggested that maybe he could help out at one of my APS Old Collegians cross-country races. He agreed, but rather than doing it just once, he became a trusted timekeeper at events for the following 20 years plus, come rain, hail or shine. In closing, I'd like to pass on the sentiments of one of his former employees at John Purvis and Son, Robin Arnouts, who lives in Sydney now, so can't be here today. She wrote to us and said, "David taught me that people are people. Whether they are high net worth clients or tenants struggling to pay the rent on a bedsit. He treated everyone with the same respect. I remember him always favouring a few of the old tenants we had in Glenferrie Road bedsits. He would personally go and collect their cash rents as they only trusted him with their money. He was so caring and thoughtful and would patiently listen to their woes and stories despite how busy he was. Within a short time, I realised he wasn't a scary boss and really just a softie. We used to laugh a lot. He taught us that all our roles are serious, but we should always remember to laugh. He certainly made us laugh. I thank him for the values, principle and ethics that still hold dear to me in this otherwise crazy business. Your father was one of a kind."
Thank you, Mark, for that lovely walk down memory lane. So although David loved many things, his greatest love and achievement in life was the love that he shared with his wife Joan and 4 children, Mark, Katie, Alison and Andrew. He had such a whole life before kids and grandkids, and yet they do not know what life is without him. And now I'd like to invite Alison, followed by grandson Nick, to share a few words.
Welcome everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this service. We really appreciate you all. Dad loved to tell us stories, so I thought I'd tell you some stories of our dad to give you a flavour of a few of the little things that added up to a big life. Dad enjoyed driving, as Mark mentioned, and he kept it up well into his 90s. And he bought many cars over his lifetime. Unfortunately, as Mark's already alluded to, some of them turned out to be lemons. One notable car was his Burgundy XJ Jaguar, which had a particularly dodgy gearbox. We often joked with him that he was like Arthur Daly from Minder, arriving in that car. Unwittingly, one car Dad bought had to be returned as it didn't belong to the man he bought it from. Dad, for a time, also enjoyed being out on the water on Port Phillip Bay in his little tinny, fishing for flathead off Mount Martha. The first time Tim, my then boyfriend, met Dad, he found himself neck deep in freezing water while Dad, high and dry in the boat, tried to start it. Thankfully, that didn't put Tim off. He's here today. That boat too had a dodgy engine, with it catching fire a couple of times over the years. Mum called it Dad's stink boat. Sailing with her in her little mirror off Mount Martha Beach, she would be both amused and annoyed as he drove his boat around and around her in circles to put her off her game. As Mark mentioned, Dad was quite partial to a beer, and in later life loved nothing more than a glass of Peroni. When he visited Canberra, where we live, we would offer him a local beer instead, but he would always turn it down, insisting he didn't like Canberra beer. So one time Tim played a trick and passed him a glass of beer, and Dad, believing it to be Peroni, downed it, smacked his lips, said, "Well, now that's a beer." He was disbelieving and a bit cross when he was told it was actually one of those Canberra beers that he so disliked. Dad loved dogs. He would walk our dog Terry by driving the car around the block, hanging out the window, yelling, "Come on, Terry," as the dog hurtled along the nature strip following the car. It's not something you could do today. As Mark mentioned, Dad was a proud member of the Army Reserve. After I returned from a recent riding trip to Tallangatta in northern Victoria, Dad told me of the time he lost half his unit in an army exercise near there. He was in charge of a group driving armoured vehicles, and when some went missing and couldn't be raised over the radio, he and those with him adjourned to the pub at Kutong, spending a lovely afternoon with a few bevies waiting for their return. One night, when I was at university, well before the advent of personal computers, I was using the electric typewriter in Dad's office to finish an essay when there was an almighty crash and the back door of the office flew off its hinges as someone took a sledgehammer to it to break in. I escaped out the front door, the perpetrator ran off, the police came, and Dad arrived to find out what had gone on. I do remember being a bit shaken, but Dad didn't seem to notice, and never one to miss an opportunity, proceeded to talk to real estate with the officer in attendance. Andrew will talk about Dad's love of travel. I had two particularly memorable trips with Dad in England. He famously locked our whole family out of our apartment we'd booked in London one evening. He wasn't very popular after that. The same trip, he walked us miles and miles around London, saying, "It's this way," when we wanted to go and see something, only to arrive at the destination to find the place was not where he thought it was. He was relying on his memories from 1949, and they weren't, as it turned out, a great way to navigate London in 2010. Last year, Katie and I accompanied Dad to York, where just after arriving, he accidentally fell down the stairs and spent a month in hospital in the UK. He quite enjoyed it, actually, singing with the Yorkshire men in his ward, even though he couldn't understand a word they were saying. And remarkably, he managed the long trip back to Australia, where he made a full recovery from his injuries. When Dad worked at Australia House, as Mark mentioned, his bosses encouraged him to apply for the Australian Foreign Service. Recently, in recalling those days, Dad wondered what sort of life he would have had he applied for that job and been successful. We agreed that while he might have travelled the world, he probably wouldn't have married my mum, our mum, and found what he called his little piece of paradise. I'm so grateful for the stories, the fun, the stability and the love he gave us. I will miss him and his stories.
Thanks everyone for attending, and a special thanks to those who travelled to come here. My sister Caroline and I and the rest of the family really appreciate your attendance, and it's ever a credit to Grandpa that he could attract such a crowd. Caroline and I weren't super close to our grandpa growing up. His daughter and our mother, Alison, had already moved to Canberra by the time Caroline and I were born. We'd rarely see Grandpa and Grandma much more than once or twice per year. And while Grandpa was ever kind and friendly, he was also a figure who often stood behind our grandma, ever supportive but always from a little further afar. During Christmas and sometimes Easter celebrations as children, we'd recall his voice echoing through his and Grandma's small house in Camberwell, or at ours in Canberra, only ever raised in laughter or in some discussion with Grandma. They were inseparable and clearly held a deep and enduring affection for one another. I recall one of the last things he ever mentioned to me was how beautiful she'd been. Growing up, Grandpa was a friendly and kind figure, rotund and jolly, and often with a glass of cold beer in hand. He was very comfortable taking a joke from someone in the family and happily dish ones out in return. It was only when Caroline and I grew older that he decided to reveal a little bit more about himself to us, and we realised the breadth of experiences he'd had. Some of my favourite stories of Grandpa included his keen military interest as a child, where he had actively monitored the goings-on in the Second World War as a boy. He'd also lived a bit of a threadbare existence when he worked in post-war London, where rationing had continued and the scars of the Blitz were still visible. I think between these experiences and many others with his family, he knew what a wonderful and charmed life he'd lived, if he'd have been a bit unhappy at not having reached 100. Through his life, Grandpa displayed traits which were really impressive. He was amiable, relaxed, full of bonhomie, and sharp as a tack right up until the end. He made a profound impact on Caroline and I, and his happy memory will continue through us. Thank you.
Thank you, Alison and Nick. So travelling was another great love of David's, and now I'd like to invite Andrew to share some memories of his adventures.
Okay. Right. Sorry, wait a second. Okay, all right. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I'm going to talk about travel, which he did an awful lot of. So, Dad loved travelling far and wide, and also closer to home. His wanderlust got more pronounced the older he got. I'm going to talk about some of the highlights, and also some of what I think are best called his heroic failures. I was fortunate enough to accompany him and Mum on several trips. It all kicked off when he and Doff went to London in the late 1940s. Took 5 weeks on a ship to get there. They stayed for 2 years, during which time he worked at Australia House. Rationing was still very much a thing for the 2 years they spent there. Apparently personal bathing was rationed too. This started his lifelong love of the UK, in particular London. Fast forward a few decades when marriage, births and army service were largely out of the way and the era of the jumbo jet had begun. 1972 saw David and Joan's first big trip to the UK and Europe, with the final trip in 2023. As John Purvis and Son became more established, This was the heyday of, I'm assuming, tax-deductible overseas real estate conferences, which Dad enthusiastically embraced. By this stage, he was getting pretty well known in real estate circles. More on that shortly. It wasn't just overseas travel. There were, of course, many happy summer holidays at Mount Martha. First in the caravan park that used to be along Balcombe Creek, and when that closed, the Fibro Shack around the corner in Meringue Avenue, where the family ventured more often and spent many happy times. In 1980, Katie was living in Japan for a period, and this was my first trip accompanying them, and indeed my first overseas trip. Quite the culture shock for me at age 10. I suspect it was for Mum and Dad too. During one trip, they stayed at the Villa d'Este on Lake Como in Italy. The room they stayed in now costs close to $5,000 a night. It seems a lot of these realty conferences were in America, and he just loved going to them. Increasingly, Mum and Dad were also exploring the world after these conferences. We loved the presents they invariably brought home afterwards. David's networking prowess in real estate led to him being recognised in the most unlikely of places. When we were travelling in Hawaii in 1986, we went to a remote diner on one of the outer islands. Within a couple of minutes, there was a cry of, "David Purvis, what are you doing here?" Another agent from Melbourne, of course. According to Mum, this was pretty common. I remember both of us looking at each other and just going, "Not again." After he retired, the travel increased, as it should, and got more frequent the older he got. Some of the highlights were with Kimberley, Panama Canal, Alaska, and the Rockies. At age 88, he visited Petra in Jordan. Let's talk about these heroic failures for a moment. There was a time he literally stopped traffic on the Sydney Harbour Bridge during morning peak, when the axle on the family caravan snapped. This was the day before school returned, and we all had to fly back to Melbourne, which at the time was quite the luxury. Better than 12 hours in a car. Another time he took the family camping. He managed to wreck the tent inside out. Of course, it bucketed down in the middle of the night, and everybody and everything inside was soaked. The camping trip was abandoned then and there. Not so heroic was his legendary ability to forget his wallet. On one particular occasion, he forgot his wallet and passport, which is a particularly big issue when you're at the airport with your flight leaving in a few hours. They were in a jacket pocket in Candace's car, heading the wrong way down the Tullamarine Freeway, and he didn't yet have a mobile phone. Candace, to her absolute credit, reunited them in time. He travelled overseas 4 times in his 90s, including by himself to London when he was 91, with the final European jaunt just last year. Another part of his remarkable and full life. Older fella, I'm going to miss you more than you possibly know. Rest well. Love you.
Thank you, Andrew. And now Katie is going to share a few words with us.
We loved our dad very, very much, as I know you all did too. It seemed everyone who met him loved him. I decided for my part of the eulogy to make a list of the things Dad loved. His life was full of love. First of all, obviously, he loved Mum. He loved us, his kids. He loved his grandkids. He loved his friends. He loved his mum and dad and his siblings. And he loved all of his kids' friends. So many of you are here today. He always welcomed our friends to the family home and was interested in you, and I know you loved him back. He loved his regiment, the 4th 19th Prince of Wales Light Horse, and I thank some representatives of the regiment for being here today. He loved Scotch College, where he went to school, and he continued his association with the school for many years. He attended the annual dinner of the Old Collegians almost every year, and in the most recent one that he attended, they would always ask who was at school in this decade, who was in school in this decade, and so forth. And the last one he went to, he was so proud, he was the oldest one there. He loved, as you've heard, he loved real estate, and he would light up whenever talk turned to real estate. When we were all purchasing our own properties, he just loved getting into talking to the agents about that. He would light up. He loved cars, as you've heard. His last car, as you heard, was a bright red Fiat 500, a manual car, and he loved that car so much. He loved the Melbourne Football Club, as you will see also in the photos coming up. He loved Ron Barassi, he loved Christian Petrarca, and he loved Taylor Harris from the women's team. He loved being a member of the Melbourne Cricket Club for many years, and he loved going to the MCG. Dad also loved theatre and took us to many shows from an early age. He especially loved movies. Some of his favourites were the Ealing comedies, MGM musicals, Some Like It Hot, the original Star Wars movie, and his very favourite of all was Casablanca. He had good taste. He loved music. He especially loved the Russian composers Tchaikovsky and Rachmaninoff and the big bands of the 1930s and 40s. Dad loved words, and I'm a book editor by trade, and we would often discuss language and words together. We took great delight in that. He was great doing crosswords and trivia quizzes especially. He loved showing off his great knowledge. You've heard that he loved travel. His favourite place outside Melbourne probably was England, most especially London. He loved eating sweet things, had a sweet tooth. I'm sure you're getting a picture of how much of this he's passed on to me in particular and to all of us. He loved eating sweet things. He loved raspberries. They were his favourite. You've heard already that he loved a drink. Dad loved laughing. He especially loved Peter Sellers, the Goons, and he adored Fawlty Towers. He loved rude jokes and rude songs. I discovered after I'd been in the university choir scene for a while that we knew the same rude songs. He'd learnt them in the Army Reserve. I learnt them at the pub. Dad loved chatting to people. He loved dogs. He loved pretty girls. He loved little kids. He loved staying up late. And he really loved being the centre of attention. Dad and I went on a river cruise in 2022 from Budapest to Amsterdam, and we sincerely had the most wonderful time. I went as his carer, essentially, but he turned out to be so independent and so able to take care of himself that after a couple of nights, I knew I didn't need to keep an eye on him all the time because he was perfectly fine. On that trip, he discovered that he loved to sing, and on the last night of the cruise, he'd struck up a friendship with the entertainer on the boat, and he practiced a song with him, and he sang it to the whole crowd and brought me to tears and a lot of others. You'll be hearing the song next up in the photo display. And also on that cruise, he discovered he loved dancing. Again, there's a photo in the display of Dad up on the dance floor one night. Our cruise was pretty special because I believe sincerely that Dad, being the oldest person on the cruise by far, gave the other oldies on the cruise, who were mostly over 70, the permission to have fun. Because he loved it so much, and he was up there on the dance floor. We have a little Facebook group of the passengers who were on that trip, and I let them know about Dad's death. One of them, and they posted the most lovely comments. One of them said he was the life of the party. And here is a quote I'm going to finish with from the cruise director, Gernot, who was the most fabulous person and who became a dear friend of both Dad and me on the cruise. He said, "David was and will forever be one of my favourite guests on my cruises. the dance party after our Salzburg day, when I went to bed at 10:30, to be met by David on the way out of the lounge when he got back in with the words, "I'm not done dancing." Will be always with me on every tour I run. Love you, Dad.
Thank you, Katie. So what a legacy and what a wonderful life. To everyone who's contributed today, thank you for sharing your words and your love. And from the snippets, there's no doubt that you will miss having David in your lives. And he will always be in your thoughts and conversations and has left an indelible print on your hearts. So after all the spoken words, it's now time to take a gentle walk down memory lane to look back on David's life with a lovely collection of treasured photos. This is a special time of remembrance and reflection, a journey of photos and memories of David's life and happy days together. And the music that you will hear is that beautiful song, "Love Changes Everything," the song that he sang with much passion on the river cruise with Katie. So enjoy the music and the wonderful memories.
Love changes everything, hands and faces, earth and sky. Love changes everything, how you live and how you die. Love can make the summer fly, or a night seem like a lifetime. This love changes everything. Now I tremble at your name. Nothing in the world will ever be the same. Love changes everything. Days are longer, words mean more. Love changes everything. Pain is deeper than before. Love will turn your world around, and that world will last forever. Yes, love changes everything, brings you glory, brings you shame. Nothing in the world will ever be the same. Off into the world we go, planning futures,
What beautiful memories. So now I'd like to invite you to join us by singing Battle Hymn of the Republic. Thank you, Catherine. So for all that we've heard today, David's family love him and miss him and thank him for all the values that he instilled and the memories he created. Shortly we will conclude our service to farewell David when we will take him outside to the waiting hearse, and I'd like to invite everyone to follow behind. When we get outside, I'd like to invite you to form a guard of honour as a path of love for David on both sides of the driveway, starting at the corner and going towards the road. And I'd just like to respectfully ask that you hold your sympathies for David's loved ones until after he is left, so that they can just spend some time focusing their love on David at this time, and they look forward to being surrounded by all of your love very shortly. Getting together and socialising is as equally important to what we share in here. And with this in mind, I'd like to warmly invite you to stay and join David's family for refreshments. David will be greatly missed, and he'll always be remembered with such deep love. And for his family, his ripples will forever gently caress the edges of your lives. And little by little you may let go of loss, but never of love. So for those who are able to, I'd like to invite you to please stand for the closing of our ceremony. David, there is a sadness in your family's heart as they say goodbye, but there is a profound gratitude for your life, and you will never be forgotten. They will think of you often, but especially at family get-togethers, when they drive through Hawthorne, when they do a crossword or they enjoy a beer, and especially when they hear the Melbourne theme song. May you rest in peace and in love.
Some things in life are bad, they can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. And this'll help things turn out for the best. And always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the light side of life. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you've forgotten, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, don't be silly chumps, just purse your lips and whistle, that's the thing. Hey, always look on the bright side of life. Come on. Always look on the bright side of life. For life is quite absurd, and death's the final word. You must always face the curtain with a bow. Forget about your scene, give the audience a grin. Enjoy it, it's your last chance anyhow. So always look on the bright side of death. Just before you draw your terminal breath. Life's a piece of shit when you look at it. Life's a laugh and death's a joke, it's true. You'll see it's all a show, keep 'em laughing as you go. Just remember that the last laugh is on you. And always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the right side of life. Come on, Brian, cheer up. Always look on the bright side of life. Always look on the bright side of life. Worst things happen at sea, you know. Always look on the bright side. I mean, what you got to lose? You know, you come from nothing, you're going back to nothing. What you lost? Nothing. Look on the right side of life. Nothing will come from nothing, you know what I say? Cheer up, you old bugger. Come on, give us a quiz. There you are. See? It's the end of the film. Incidentally, this record's available in the foyer. Some of us got to live as well, you know. Alright, it's a lot. Let's get this place locked down. Change this mantle within 3 weeks. You think pays for all this rubbish? Never make the money back, you know. I told him. I said to him, Bernie, I said, they'll never make that money back.